Okay, well, I'm rapidly becoming the man of 1,000 apologies, I think. I've apologised a couple of times recently for not making videos on my usual guff, and I'm going to apologise today. Not just for the crappy lighting, it's evening. I don't usually make videos about this time. I usually make them in the day when I've got some natural light. But I'm going to apologise for making a video on my usual guff. I want to revisit the subject that I visited the other day on belief, on disbelief, on atheism and on theism, and on categorising people. And I looked at the argument that Matt Dillahunty had made in the clip that I linked, and that Bionic Dance had made in the quote that I made in the clip that I'd linked again there. I want to revisit that to go over a couple of objections. There were plenty of objections. Some people agreed with me, some people disagreed with me, which was nice. It's nice to have a bit of discussion and a bit of debate rather than everybody singing from the same hymn sheet. I really appreciated that, to be honest. I want to revisit it because there's a couple of points that I want to make across that I want to clarify. One of the problems that people had, that some people pointed me to, was this old chestnut of this kind of what I think of the two-axis approach of theism, atheism, gnosticism, agnosticism. It's never entirely clear to me how this works, at what point you jump from agnosticism to gnosticism, for example. How much information do you have to have? If you're missing just one shred of the information, is it still an agnostic position, or how far down that scale do we get before we'd call it a gnostic position? So I don't know. If I was to draw it on some kind of graph, I'm not really quite sure where I'd plot the line, and I gave that some thought thinking about making this video, thinking about plotting it and the different plots that you could make along those lines. That was an example that a lot of people had, and it's what I want to say is it's not a model that I've ever liked, and I want to try and explain to you why I think it's a really poor way of representing somebody's position. So what I want to do is go back to the coin toss example that I gave in my video. People had a couple of problems with the coin toss. I don't think they were relevant issues. One is that a coin toss is 50-50, which they didn't like. And the other fact is that you know the probability of the outcome, which they didn't like. Whereas obviously the probability is unknown, and it's a kind of personal weighing of the evidence, isn't it, with regard to God's existence or the existence of a God. So it's a different kind of thing. I didn't think they were problems. I could argue why they're not problems in this video, but rather than bore you with that, I'll bore you with something else. I'll alter the experiment to try and take that out of the equation. So what I'm going to do is this. I've got a coin here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you this coin. Okay? You might be, if you're confused at this stage and you're kind of looking around your keyboard for the coin, I haven't really given you the coin. This is just a thought experiment, just in case you've had a few beers, you maybe smoked a bit of a joint and you're looking around for that coin. You don't actually have it, we're just pretending. So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds. What I'd like you to do is go down to your smithy, which I'm sure you've got downstairs, and then to weld me a nice dome of metal on one side of the coin. That's what I would like you to do. You've done it, and you're giving me it back. There we go. Okay. I don't know if you can see that there. You can probably see it at this point. To be honest, I was hoping for something a bit better. It rather looks like you've just wrapped the coin in aluminium foil with more foil on one side than the other. But I only gave you a few seconds, so I won't hold that against you in this instance. So you've given me this coin, and I'm going to evaluate this coin now. And I've got some experience of, not inconsiderable experience of tossing over the past 40 years, and of objects falling and landing and various different things. And using all of that, I kind of think that the flat side is the head side. And I think there's probably about a 60 to 80% chance that it's going to land heads. That's what I believe, that it's about a 60 to 80% chance of it landing heads. So that's what I would say. I could be wrong, okay? I could be wrong, but if I had to find a proposition that would well fit with what I do believe, that's what I would say. I'd say I believe the chance of it landing heads is about 60 to 80%. Of course, we could do the experiment. We could flip this, couldn't we? If we could be asked, we could flip it 1,000 times and see how many times it lands heads, how many times it lands tails. I'm not going to bother doing that. Right here and now, or I'm just not going to bother doing it, to be quite honest. The fact is that we could do that, but we haven't. But I've told you what I believe. I've given you the proposition that best fits my belief. But say you ask me now, okay, this is the proposition, Jim, the coin will land heads. Okay? What do I answer there? Well, it seems to me from the two-axis model that what I should answer is that I believe the coin will land heads, that I'm an agnostic headsist is what I would be, an agnostic headsist. But the problem is, I don't believe the coin will land heads. The statement, I believe the coin will land heads, just doesn't sit right with me for 1 minute, because that isn't what I believe. What I believe is that there's a 60 to 80% probability the coin will land heads. And just mitigating the fact I'm a headsist by saying I'm an agnostic headsist just doesn't really seem to cut the mustard as far as I'm concerned there. So this is why I suggested in the last video that surely we're better off looking what proposition people really do believe in than picking just one set proposition and saying what you have to do is to declare a belief or a disbelief in this proposition, and then we're going to parcel you off on account of it. Let's take an example like that coin example, but let's put it back in the religious domain. Let's imagine for a minute, of course, I'm an atheist. I regard myself as an atheist. But let's imagine that I thought that the chance of a God existing was about, I don't know, 60 to 70%. You know, it's above average, but only a bit above average. So I might be quite happy if you said, what kind of proposition would you really want to subscribe to? That might be a proposition that I thought, yeah, that really sums up my belief. I believe there's a 60 to 70% chance God exists. So here's the thing. Let's imagine we're all in this position, okay? Everybody watching this video, you all believe the same thing. That's the statement that would sum you all up. 60 to 70% probability that God exists is about where you're at mentally. Okay? I think we're all happy, we can all entertain that. So now I ask you, do you believe God exists? What are you going to answer? One thing that I know is that some of you will say, on the basis of that statement, I should answer, I believe that God exists. I know that, for example, Wisdom in Nature, the philosopher who posted a comment on my video, he has a threshold of 0.5% on it. So he would say, logically, that's the answer that you should give. And I know that a lot of other people, based on what they said, would say the same thing. Matt Dillahunty, I know from a comment that I've seen elsewhere, thinks differently. He thinks you've got to reach a certain level of conviction where you feel convinced of something. Surely 60 to 70% is not that level. So he would say, based on that mental position of that 60 to 70%, he would say, no, you should answer, I do not believe God exists. So I know of the people watching this video, you will fall into two camps as to how that question should be answered. So here's the thing. If you can have a group of people who all think the same thing, but when you present them with this proposition, they give diametrically opposed answers, and on the basis of that we classify some of you as theists and some of you as atheists, even though you all believe exactly the same thing. Surely there is something wrong. That cannot be the best way of approaching the situation. Surely a better way of approaching the situation is to find the proposition that best fits what you do believe, and then we can go about assessing where we should place that proposition, how we should label people who do believe that kind of proposition. Finally, to go back to that agnostic thing, it's because of all of this that I actually really quite like the colloquial usage of the term agnostic. I know I'm not the only one. I'm in good company. Richard Dawkins likes the colloquial use of that term. I'm in good company. Richard Dawkins isn't in quite such good company, it has to be said on that one. On this scheme of things, I would have somebody like that. I would just call them an agnostic. Technically, it might not be right, okay? But we all know, on the colloquial sense, it just means it's somebody who's kind of in those middle probabilities there. They're really kind of genuinely undecided on a probabilistic sense. They think there's a reasonable chance that God exists. They think there's a reasonable chance God doesn't exist. That's kind of where they're at. I think that scheme of things actually tells you a lot more about where people are. And it provides a separator between atheists and theists. If we don't do it along those lines, then one tiny little change in what you believe jumps you from a theist all the way to an atheist. That's pretty much all I wanted to say. I don't think I'm going to have convinced a single person who wasn't convinced last time, but at least you'll know where I'm coming from that little bit better. And what I want to convince you anyway. I like the debate. Thanks for watching the video, and bye for now.